Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate that we've had a long day. So what I've done is what I usually don't do, which is produce a slide. And I've produced the slide because I thought I would try to summarize some of what I've taken away from this day and put it in the context of the overall charge I've been given, which is 7 topics or 7 observations on AI and leadership. So let me start by walking you through these, and then I'll add some context or some color to them. We heard in the morning from Mike, my colleague, Professor Woodridge, about sort of the actual computer science of AI, and there was something in particular that struck me, which several of my AI colleagues have mentioned to me as well, that there's something about AI and the intelligence we're talking about in AI that is emergent rather than algorithmic. And as a result of it being emergent rather than algorithmic, we actually have fairly little understanding of how it really works. So when the AI figures out whether A is taller than B or B is taller than C, it wasn't expressly programmed to do that, but it has learned that. It has that intelligence has emerged from that. But notwithstanding that emergence of intelligence across the wide applications of AI, my sense is it almost certainly does not experience consciousness as we experience consciousness, as human beings experience consciousness. And this is an important distinction because consciousness, as you think about it, is also an emergent property. It's also something that we find it very hard to sort of define and pinpoint. But consciousness is actually the basis of all emotion. If we're not conscious, we are incapable of having emotions. And emotions are important because emotions are the basis of all law. If you don't have emotions, then you don't have laws. All laws trace themselves to some sort of emotion that we feel as human beings. And so what that means is that AI does not have these emotions, and AI has no basis to form laws. And as a result, the implication for us as humans, who do have consciousness, who do have, therefore, emotions, and do therefore have a capacity to build laws, is that we ought to be building the laws for AI, as opposed to let AI build those laws for themselves. So I say that's the first and most important implication that I take away from this, that we can't leave the process of lawmaking around AI to AI itself, because AI has no consciousness. The second thing, and we've heard from several speakers today on this point, so not to belabor it, but AI is a big freaking deal. It is not a linear change, it is a non-linear change, and it is a non-linear change perhaps on a scale even greater than the Industrial Revolution. If you think about the Industrial Revolution and the world before it, for thousands of years, we engaged in more or less a similar existence. If you looked at what life looked like in the year 300 AD, and you looked at what life looked like in the year 1700 AD, many things about life would look more or less the same. The organization of societies would look more or less the same. The vast majority of people in societies were engaged in agricultural activities because agricultural productivity was so low, and you had to effectively force yourselves or force large parts of the population to engage in that. But then, of course, the Industrial Revolution comes around, and it completely changes life as we know it. And just in a span of about 100 years, sometimes in some countries even less than that, life completely changes. And the world today, or even the world 100 years ago, would have been unrecognizable to people before the Industrial Revolution. What AI promises to do is probably even greater than that. The world that, when we're sort of the other end of this step change that AI represents in society, we're going to be looking at this world that we live in, and it will be completely unrecognizable. And so we have to prepare for the fact that this is a non-linear shift in the way the world works and the way society works. Many of the institutions that we hold very dearly, institutions like democracy, institutions like universities, that we've heard from several people from universities over the course of this day, those institutions may not exist in this new world. And we have to be prepared for that kind of radical change because this is a nonlinear shift. The third observation that I take away from a lot of what we've heard today is whether the future of AI is good in the sense of being morally good, and again, it's only us as humans who can conceive something as being morally good, not AI itself, will depend on both deliberate leadership, that is to say, purposeful leadership, as well as, unfortunately, some luck, accidents of history. Because much of the course of history is, in fact, shaped by having deliberate acts of leadership, but also having the right people at the right time. And it is an open question about whether we will have deliberate acts of leadership in the context of AI. I'll speak to that a little later in this session. Of course, the accidents of history we can't control. So you take something as simple as the invention of the assembly line. So Henry Ford was the person who's usually credited with the invention of the assembly line. This is a profound invention in the basis of capitalism. It completely changes the way capitalism works. Now, Henry Ford had a particular vision that the gains of that particular innovation had to be widely shared across his employee base. He said, if my employees cannot afford the cars that will be produced as a result of this nonlinear shift in production technology, then there's no point deploying that technology. There was a completely different path that history could have taken if the person who invented the assembly line was not Henry Ford, or if Henry Ford took a different view of that in that moment in time. So the fact that the Industrial Revolution and the fact that the assembly line and its impact on capitalism evolved the way it did, and we experience it as it is today, is a function of that accident of history, that it was Henry Ford in that moment who made that decision. A lot of the future of AI is going to depend on these accidents of history, and we have to be prepared for that. But it's also going to depend on deliberate or purposeful leadership. The fourth thing that I want us to take away from what we've heard today is as much as we've heard about sort of risks of AI and potential for AI to go wrong in different situations, etc., we simply cannot afford to slow down the pace of AI. We can't afford to say, well, let's create some sort of committee that'll figure out what are the places where AI will be safe to deploy and what are the places that AI will be unsafe to deploy. And part of the reason we can't afford to do that is because we're running in this AI race. I come from the United States, and in the context of the United States, the AI race is against China. For those of you from Colombia, you, of course, are running this race in the context of two massive superpowers that are competing with each other. If you think about the world before the Industrial Revolution, the two wealthiest countries in the world were China and India, and they accounted for about half of the world's population and 60% of the world's GDP. All that changed within the course of 50 years as a result of the Industrial Revolution and the kind of wealth it brought to Britain, and of course to a few other countries in Western Europe. AI can have that kind of impact on the world in the course of the next generation, in the course of our lifetimes. So we cannot, as a matter of a national security priority for, say, the United States, or equivalently for China, or indeed for Colombia, afford to slow down the pace of AI. You're going to have to let the technology develop at the pace at which it will develop. So what that means is that we are going to have to, once we see what the impact of AI is, develop some, what we would call as economists, ex post solutions. We're going to have to develop regulation for AI only after we've seen the impact. Now, that's not ideal. In a best case scenario, you want to do some careful planning, and you want to say, here's the scenario in which I'll deploy it, here's the scenario in which I won't deploy it, but we don't have that luxury. And so we're going to have to think about the regulation of AI not as an ex ante affair, but as an ex post affair. The fifth thing is who owns the fruits of AI is going to be that central question that we're going to have to resolve. So this question of developing regulation after the fact, well, AI is going to unleash tremendous potential. There will be lots of gains from AI, just like there were lots of gains from the Industrial Revolution. And then there was the question of who owns those gains from the Industrial Revolution. Equivalently, there will be the question of who owns the gains from AI. Now, we've heard about this already today, that a large part of AI is impossible without the data mining that it's done, and the data mining, in effect, involves systemic theft. Now, there are lots of lawsuits that are currently in process, working their way through various judicial systems, including the Southern District of New York in the United States, which are trying to figure out this question about the systemic theft of data, personal data, to create these databases. But the important thing for us to note is that Look, just as AI cannot be trained without being exposed to this data, human beings cannot be trained without being exposed to this data. All of us are products of our learning environment. As academics, we say we're often standing on the shoulders of giants. So any kind of contribution that I make is not entirely due to myself. It is in fact largely due to drawing on the wisdom of others. Now, the reason why this is different for AI versus for human beings is that for human beings, the scale at which we can do this is actually limited by, say, the 24 hours we live in the day, and of course, half of that time we'll be doing other things, we'll be sleeping and doing sort of life work and so forth. So it's limited by the scale of that. Whereas in the context of AI, it is not limited by the scale of human operation. It effectively is exposed to an infinite scale. So there's systemic theft, which is not dissimilar to the kind of, we don't call it theft in the context of how we draw on the inspiration of others. I would not be able to write the papers I did if I didn't spend as much time going to museums. And that going to museums and looking at great art is what inspires me, in the same way AI is inspired by the experiences of all of us. But the scale at which it operates means that it raises a completely different legal question that we haven't dealt with in the law just yet. And this is a question that we're going to have to figure out very, very quickly, because the gains of AI are already being apportioned across winners and losers. And we've also seen some of that in the conversations today. So the sixth thing is that the public policy, that is to figure out this question of the who owns AI, is going to be what we call a thin political market. What is a thin political market? So about 10 years ago, I wrote a book about how regulation in very technical areas of the world are developed. And the problem with these areas of the world, these very technical areas of the world, is there's usually somewhere between 5 and 50 people in the whole world on that particular issue that really understand that issue. And they're the people that also have the greatest commercial stake in that issue. So because they really understand the issue, they stand to make a huge amount of money if they sort of, are able to capture the gains from that. So there is what we call a co-location of the expertise and the interest. There is a co-location of the expertise and the interest. And this happens, the more technical the issue, the more specialized the issue, the more likely something like this is to happen. And the general public's ability to intermediate in these issues is quite limited because of how technical the issue is. And that's what AI, the regulation of AI and the distribution of gains from AI is going to look like. It's going to look like a thin political market. And already the kind of actions we've seen from folks like Sam Altman at OpenAI don't bode well. So usually what happens in these thin political markets is that the experts, they start off with the best of intentions, and human nature kicks in, and they realize how much money they can make, and then they engineer the rules of the game in a way that benefits them. This has happened time after time after time in human history, and so when OpenAI started, about maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a great deal of optimism that it started on this premise that would be a not-for-profit initiative. Folks like Elon Musk and others invested a good deal of money into it. They made it work for a number of years, but then that model just wasn't able to hold up. And now we've seen a lot of governance challenges at an organization like OpenAI. We've seen a lot of people leave OpenAI. We've seen OpenAI re-engineer part of itself from being a not-for-profit to a for-profit endeavor. And, the fact that the people who are sort of building these AI systems, or who are at the forefront of these AI systems, are also buying large bunkers in which to sequester themselves in the context of some sort of doomsday scenario, none of that sort of bodes well for the kind of citizenship that we want to see in this moment. So the regulation of AI is going to be a thin political market, and so far the evidence in that doesn't look great. Okay, so that's just the reality check of what the world is going to look like to, looking at history for now. But of course, history is not destiny, right? And so effectively, if we thought that everything was predetermined, then there would be no point sort of engaging in life itself. And we would say, well, we should sort of just let the history play itself out. So the whole idea of learning this history, the whole idea of going through these first 6 bullet points is to say, okay, we should be aware of how this movie will play if we don't do anything deliberate about it. We should be aware of how this movie will play out if we sit back and let sort of the natural order of things take charge. So what we do need is a radical new model of leadership. We need certainly active leadership. We need everyone in this room, and that's why it's so tremendously prescient of you, President Duque, to organize a conference like this at a time like this, because you have to raise the awareness around this issue, and you have to get as many people engaged on this issue as possible if you don't want the movie to play out like these first 6 bullet points. What would that leadership look like? This is an age of profound uncertainty. This is an age where we're, again, running through this cusp. Imagine what it was like to live in that period shortly after the steam engine had been commercialized in England, and we were being able to do work that would take 1,000 man-hours in less than 1 man-hour. Imagine the profound anxiety and uncertainty that that society was facing at that time. What is the kind of leadership we need in that moment is the same kind of question we need to be asking ourselves today. The short answer is we don't know the answers to all of these questions, right? There is a temptation and a tendency, because of how complex these questions are, to say, especially if a populist leader comes along and says, well, I have the answers and I will figure it out for you, there is a temptation for people to put their trust in that popular leader and in that populist leader and say, yes, I can't figure it out, I don't even know what's going on, but I trust so-and-so, so I'm going to put this in the hands of so-and-so, and they're going to work this all out for us. But the cold hard truth is that nobody knows, not even that populist leader knows what the answer is. Nobody knows what the answer is. And so the model for leadership in this moment, and we have dealt with these moments of great uncertainty in the past as well, and the classical Greeks write about this. The model for leadership, I would argue, in this moment is what we would call temperate leadership, rather than the kind of bombastic or courageous leadership that you might see if someone was leading a battle into a country into war. And what is temperate leadership? At its core, temperate leadership is recognizing that you don't know the answers to the great questions that you have to lead your organization or your country through. But what you have to do, therefore, is to create a process of active listening so that you can hear from as many voices as are needed in order to be able to formulate those answers. So to be able to create processes and systems that allow for decisions and to be decentralized, but also allow for information to make itself up to the top so that when you do make those decisions, they're incredibly well-informed decisions. That's what we would recognize as temperate leadership. One of the advantages of this temperate model of leadership is that it builds resilience in the context of this great deal of uncertainty. Because we're living in this age of uncertainty, because we're living in this moment where we don't know what the answers are, we need to diversify the decisions that we are making. Because if we make a big decision on sort of option A, and it turns out option A is the wrong option, then of course we're toast. So we can't afford to do that. So what we want to do is to actually create systems and processes that allow us to spread that risk around. And that's what temperate leadership does. It builds the resilience of the organization. It builds the resilience of the system to be able to make these decisions across a wide range of protagonists, across a wide range of actors. It allows for a large amount of information to be able to percolate up to the top levels of decision making when the decision has to be made at that top level. So that's the kind of model of leadership that I'd like us to sort of consider for this age of AI, rather than, and therefore to push back or reject the model of sort of the know-it-all, whether it's the AI genius or the populist leader that is somehow going to figure this all out for us, because the cold hard truth is they know just as little as, maybe slightly more than most of us, but not enough to make those decisions for us. I'll close with sort of a line from Nietzsche. He says, concepts that have histories cannot have definitions. I'll say that one more time. Concepts that have histories cannot have definitions. If you look at something like ChatGPT, we spent a lot of time talking about ChatGPT today. One of the things ChatGPT is very good at is providing us definitions of things, right? But it provides us those definitions of things based on our histories, based on the fact that we've experienced those concepts, and because we've experienced those concepts have histories, and those histories then yield some definition. That definition is not stable. It's not something that sticks over time, because as history evolves, the definition evolves with it as well. So the idea that AI will be able to replace us in the context of the fact that it doesn't have any of those lived experiences is something that can give us great comfort in this moment. And that, together with the right model of leadership, might indeed allow us to emerge from this moment stronger for it, taking AI as an angel rather than a demon, to pick up the theme from the conference. And with that, I see I'm exactly out of time, so let me stop here.